My government will always make sure that Australia has a seat at the table and a say in the decisions that shape our region and that shape the world. We're investing in our defence capability. We are promoting security across our region. We are seizing economic opportunities so we reap the benefits for the Australian people. In all of these endeavours over decades, we have worked together with the United States. And I look forward to working with President Trump in the future in the interests of both of our nations.
Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese there after what he called a constructive discussion with the President-elect of the United States, Donald Trump, after last week's elections. And despite those warm words, Australia faces risks from Trump's proposed trade and tariff policies, which could inflict short-term pain, including inflationary pressures. Australian Treasurer Jim Chalmers says the country would not be immune from what economists call second-round effects, but he says the nation is better equipped than others to handle those challenges. Well, joining us now here at the UBS Australasia Conference is Arthur Sinodinos, who's the Asia Group Partner and Chair of their Australia practice, and of course previously the Australian Ambassador to the US. Really great to have you with us. So,
good to see you.
Of course, every leader at the moment will be saying it's the same standard line. We'll be working with any incoming US government, right? What's really going on behind the scenes in terms of prepping?
You're right, they will say that, but they mean it because they have to, because this is the United States we're talking about. So before the election in the US, there was a lot of activity in Australia to work out who is going to win, and if so, what are the policies going to be? So I think the Australian government will be relatively well prepared for what's coming because the President-elect has been quite clear about what he wants to do. And my advice to people is he says what he means and he means what he says. So promises he's making around tariffs, around trade, taxes, deregulation, more focus on fossil fuel production as opposed to green investment. Take him at his word. And he's got 2 years with potentially the Congress in his grasp to be able to enact a lot of legislation. After that, he could face, in the midterms, a backlash, and his next 2 years would not be as productive. So all the focus is on now. The indications out of Mar-a-Lago are that he's putting his team together very quickly. He's obviously thought about it. We've already had announcement of a number of significant appointments. The ones we're particularly looking for now are Treasury Secretary, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defence. His Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, very experienced political player. I think she will do a good job of trying to corral him and his impulses, but she's not a policy person. The main policy person, Stephen Miller, the Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy, he's been with Trump since 2016. He's big on issues like immigration, and he will also be sympathetic to the views of people like Robert Lighthizer, the former US Trade Rep, who may be coming back. So I think keep an eye on what's going on. It has big ramifications for all of us.
And with the trifecta control in both majorities, I suppose there's the argument that there's less of an ability to step down from campaign rhetoric.
And he has made a big thing about keeping his promises. One of his boasts when he was out there was no more wars. And by that he means that he can clean up Russia, Ukraine, the Middle East, and whatever. So I think he'll be cautious at one level on foreign policy, but on another level, he seems to be very supportive, has been in the past, of President Putin. He's very supportive of Bibi Netanyahu in Israel. And so both those conflicts, which he has pledged to finish, the question is now, how will he finish them, on what terms, and what message does that send about the US and how it would treat issues in the Indo-Pacific, in particular issues around China and Taiwan.
And that's where Australia is uniquely vulnerable, right, both in terms of its economic dependence on Beijing, but also the security dependence on Washington. How does the government position for this? Because we've seen what happens when you get on the wrong side of China through the US, for example.
I think what the government will do is they'll be saying to President Trump, the alliances, the regional groupings in Indo-Pacific for security are in America's interest as well as in our interest. It's not so much we need them, they need us, because American security is intimately tied up with the Indo-Pacific. It's a Pacific power. China is rising. There's got to be a way of handling the rise of China in a way which deters aggression, but also channels the rise in constructive ways for the global economy. That's quite a sophisticated thing to try and put together. But that's the thing that we've all got to work on. How do we work with China to have a constructive outcome in the region? What's the balance between diplomacy and using military deterrence, and so on and so forth? That's the sort of stuff that Australia will be thinking about, because China is our major economic partner, trading partner. And so from our perspective, yes, we want our security relationship with the US, but we want to be able to trade with China, and we want to have a normal relationship with China and not have the economic and trade coercion of recent years. We withstood that. The Chinese had to back off, but we need to make sure going forward we can balance what we're doing on the economic side with what we're doing on security.
And of course, we know the Prime Minister, just a few months into the second Trump administration, will have to call a federal election. Do you think this government or a future government has now that diplomatic deftness to be able to strike that balance?
The best advice is look back to the first term to work out how President Trump operated. The only difference is he may be more effective and efficient this time because of that experience and the personnel he's bringing in. So there are markers for governments about how to handle someone like Donald Trump, and a lot of it is around being able to relate what you want done to what he is interested in. It's at that level, it's very transactional. And so I think it's important for the Australian government to have that mindset. It's unsentimental. It's not emotional. It's all about how do we do business with the leader of the free world, and we have to find common ground.
It was quite interesting. We saw, even just locally in Potts Point, right, in sort of very inner city, diverse Sydney, individuals supporting Trump on the day of the election. So I do wonder, do you worry about culture wars spilling beyond US borders into places like Australia?
There's no doubt that his victory has emboldened people on the right, particularly the further right, as opposed to the centre right. But that was always going to happen. And he's not so much a cause of that. He's also a symptom of something that's happening around the world, where in Western societies in particular, there are a lot of issues where people feel that change is happening very quickly. They feel like they're losing their place in the pecking order, and they want some feeling of what are the absolutes. And in some ways, Trump appeals to this idea in America that he can restore America and the place of some Americans to where they were in the 50s and 60s almost. And that's why a lot of his ideas are actually ideas out of the 50s and 60s in many ways. But he's also very modern in the sense that he understands how to target various groups in the community. So he's been very good at targeting his messaging, but a lot of that messaging is really around the idea that there are absolutes. This is what I stand for. This is what America stands for. And so issues like transgender, for example, they became lightning rods for being able to say to people, well, we believe in absolutes. Not everything has to be relative, right? And so that's something that appeals to a lot of people.
When it comes to engagement with China, do you have a degree of comfort that perhaps the relationship between Canberra and Beijing is on a more solid footing now, and therefore perhaps better placed to navigate the next 2 to 4 years?
We are better placed. The government has done a lot of work to stabilise the relationship, and that's important. What it means over the next few years also depends in part on how America treats China and how China then responds, and whether China, in effect, seeks to divide and conquer Western allies like us and divide us or separate us from the US. In other words, to what extent does one side or the other ask us to more explicitly choose which side we're on? In Southeast Asia, if you speak to former Prime Minister Lee and others, they said, look, the question should not be about choosing one side or the other. It's about how we all work together. In Australia's case,
Singapore is a diplomatic masterclass in that sense, right?
Absolutely. But in Australia's case, we've chosen our security partner, it's the US, but we want the economic and trade relationship with China. So we will do what we can to keep going on both those channels. If we're being asked to choose, well, we're going to change the question, because that's not the situation we want to be in.